The rain poured relentlessly over New York City, a cold and merciless downpour that mirrored the turmoil in Olivia Carter's heart. She clutched the thin coat around her shivering frame, willing her trembling hands to steady. The tattered job listing in her grip was already damp, the ink smudging slightly. It was her last hope. That's when she found the listing. Live-in housekeeper wanted. Competitive pay. Discretion required. The address led her to an estate unlike any she had ever seen. Towering wrought iron gates loomed over her, flanked by a security booth where a uniformed guard barely glanced at her before pressing a button. The gates groaned open slowly, revealing a driveway that stretched far beyond what she could see. The estate sat atop a hill, half obscured by mist, its grandeur intimidating yet eerily quiet. A house this large, this lonely, it unsettled her. "You must be Miss Carter," the woman said, eyeing her with a critical, yet not unkind gaze. "Yes," Olivia answered, forcing herself to meet the woman's eyes. "I'm here about the housekeeping position." The woman stepped aside, allowing her inside. Olivia barely had time to take in the opulent foyer before the woman spoke again. "I'm Mrs. Hawthorne, the head housekeeper. Follow me." She led Olivia through a corridor lined with expensive artwork, the kind Olivia had only ever seen in museums. The air smelled faintly of leather and polished wood. There was something about the place. It was luxurious, yes, but there was also an underlying weight to it, as if its walls held secrets. Olivia swallowed, nodding. She was in no position to be asking questions. "Understood," she replied. Olivia stepped into a dimly lit study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, and in the center of the room sat a grand desk. Behind it, a man stood with his back to her, gazing out the large window that overlooked the rain-soaked city below. Adrian Wolfe. She had heard the name before. He was one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, wealthy beyond measure, but with a reputation as cold as the steel towers he built. The tabloids called him ruthless, a man without mercy or warmth. He turned slowly, his piercing gray eyes locking onto hers. Even in the dim light, Olivia could see the sharp angles of his face, the chiseled jaw, the air of quiet authority that radiated from him. "You're here for the job," he said, his voice low and unreadable. "Yes, sir," Olivia managed, keeping her tone steady. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze assessing. "Mrs. Hawthorne speaks highly of you," he finally said. "Says you're hard-working." "I am," she answered quickly. "I'll do whatever is needed." He tilted his head slightly, as if considering something deeper than her words. Then he picked up a document from his desk and slid it toward her. "Read it," he instructed. She stepped forward and picked up the paper. It was a contract outlining her duties and expectations. The salary made her breath catch. It was generous, far more than she had anticipated, enough to cover Lucas's surgery in a matter of months. But there was a clause at the bottom, one that stood out in bold letters. Strict confidentiality required. No discussions of Mr. Wolfe's personal life. No questions. Termination upon breach. It was unusual, but not unreasonable. If privacy was his demand, she could grant him that. "I'll take the job," she said without hesitation. Adrian's lips quirked slightly, not quite a smile, but something close. "Good," he said. "You start tomorrow." Section 2. Mrs. Hawthorne was waiting at the back entrance, already dressed in her crisp gray uniform. She handed Olivia a similar uniform, black slacks and a white button-up blouse, both perfectly pressed. "Get dressed and meet me in the main hall," she instructed before disappearing down the corridor. Olivia quickly changed in the small staff quarters and made her way to the grand entrance. The house was eerily quiet, every sound swallowed by the vastness of the space. The walls were adorned with modern artwork, and the high ceilings boasted crystal chandeliers that sparkled even in the dim morning light. Mrs. Hawthorne appeared from a side hallway, holding a clipboard. "Your primary responsibilities will be maintaining the main living spaces, cleaning Mr. Wolfe's study, and ensuring his personal quarters are in order." Olivia nodded, committing the details to memory. "The only places you are not permitted to enter," Mrs. Hawthorne continued, her tone firm, "are the East Wing and the third-floor library. Those areas are strictly off-limits." A small frown creased Olivia's forehead. What was in the East Wing, and why was the library restricted? But she caught herself, no questions. "Understood," she replied. Olivia followed her through the long corridors until they reached the heavy wooden doors she had stepped through the night before. The desk is to be dusted, but do not move anything. Mr. Wolf is particular about his belongings, Mrs. Hawthorne warned. With that, she left Olivia alone in the study. Taking a deep breath, Olivia got to work. She moved efficiently, dusting the bookshelves, polishing the glass display cases, and wiping down the rich mahogany furniture. Everything about the room screamed wealth. First editions of books she could never afford, paintings by artists she only recognized from museum brochures, and sculptures that probably cost more than her entire apartment. She was careful with the desk, running her cloth over the surface gently, avoiding disturbing the meticulously placed items, except for a single small photograph frame that had been turned face down. Her fingers hesitated over it. It wasn't her business. Slowly, she turned the frame upright. The image was simple but striking. A young boy, no older than 6 or 7, with piercing gray eyes that mirrored Adrian Wolf's. His small hands clutched a toy airplane, and his smile was bright, full of life. A child. A chill ran down Olivia's spine. She had never heard of Adrian Wolf having a son. Before she could process the discovery, a deep voice cut through the silence. "What are you doing?" Olivia spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Adrian Wolf stood in the doorway. His eyes locked on her with an intensity that sent ice through her veins. I was just cleaning," Olivia stammered, hastily setting the frame back down. "It was already face down. I didn't mean to—" His gaze flickered to the photograph, then back to her. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, in a tone colder than steel, he said, "You're dismissed for the day." Olivia's stomach dropped. Had she just lost her job? She wanted to apologize, to explain, but his expression made it clear. No further words would be welcomed. She gave a quick nod and hurried out of the study, leaving Adrian Wolf standing in the dim light, staring at the photo she had uncovered. Section 3. Olivia spent the entire ride home replaying the moment in Adrian Wolf's study. His reaction had been sharp, controlled, but there had been something else in his eyes, something deeper than just irritation. Pain. She didn't understand it, but she didn't need to. All that mattered was whether she had lost her job. The thought made her chest tighten. If she had just ruined her one chance at steady income for Jacob's surgery, she didn't know what she'd do. When she arrived at her small apartment, her neighbor, Mrs. Patel, greeted her at the door with a warm smile. "Your little boy is inside. Ate his lunch, did his homework," she said, her voice kind. "He missed you, though." Mrs. Patel waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, that boy is a joy." Olivia stepped inside, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten when she saw Jacob curled up on the couch, flipping through one of his favorite picture books. His brown hair was tousled, his little hands clutching the pages. "Mom!" He beamed, scrambling off the couch and running into her arms. She hugged him tightly, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Did you have a good day?" He nodded enthusiastically. "But I missed you." "How was work?" Olivia hesitated. "It was interesting." Jacob pulled back, squinting up at her with his curious gaze. "Did you meet your boss?" She thought about Adrian Wolf's cold stare, the tension in his shoulders when he saw the photograph. "Yes," she said softly, "I did." Jacob's face lit up. "Is he nice?" Olivia forced a small smile. "I'm not sure yet." That night, after tucking Jacob into bed, Olivia sat on the couch staring at the phone. Should she call Mrs. Hawthorne? Ask if she was still employed? Before she could decide, a message popped up. "Mrs. Hawthorne, Mr. Wolf has requested you return to work tomorrow. Be on time." Relief flooded her, but confusion quickly followed. He wanted her back? After that moment in the study? She had expected him to fire her, or at the very least ignore her existence. Instead, he had specifically requested her return. Olivia had no idea what to make of that. The next morning, Olivia arrived at the Wolf estate right on time. Mrs. Hawthorne met her at the back entrance, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Wolf would like to see you in his study before you begin your tasks." Olivia's heart skipped. "Am I in trouble?" Mrs. Hawthorne didn't answer. Instead, she gestured toward the hallway. Best not to keep him waiting. Taking a steadying breath, Olivia made her way to the study. The door was slightly ajar, and she hesitated before knocking softly. "Come in," Adrian's voice called. She stepped inside, bracing herself. He was seated behind his massive mahogany desk, his gray eyes sharp as ever. The framed photograph now sat upright, positioned carefully beside a sleek silver pen. "You're back," he said, his tone neutral. "Yes, sir." Olivia answered cautiously. Silence stretched between them. It wasn't a question. Olivia swallowed. Yes. Another beat of silence. Then, to her surprise, he exhaled slowly and said, his name was Oliver. Was. The weight of the word hit Olivia like a brick. She didn't need him to explain further. The past tense told her everything. I'm sorry, she said softly. Adrian didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood and walked to the tall windows, staring out over the sprawling estate. I lost him 4 years ago, he finally said. A car accident. He was 7. Olivia's heart clenched. She hadn't expected him to share that. I can't imagine how painful that must have been, she said carefully. He turned, his expression unreadable. No, you can't. The coldness was back, but Olivia didn't flinch. I know loss, she admitted. Not like yours, but I know what it's like to be helpless while someone you love suffers. Something flickered in his gaze. Your son. She nodded. Jacob, he's 6 and he needs surgery I can't afford. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then, to her shock, he said, How much? Olivia stiffened. I'm not here for charity. I didn't say I was offering charity, he countered smoothly. I asked how much. She hesitated, then sighed. $85,000. He raised an eyebrow. And you thought a housekeeping job would cover that? Olivia squared her shoulders. I'll do whatever it takes. I won't take handouts. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or intrigue. Then let's make a deal, he said. Olivia blinked. A deal? Adrian nodded. You need money. I need someone I can trust. She frowned. Trust for what? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked back to his desk, picking up a sleek black folder and setting it down in front of her. I don't just need a housekeeper, he said. I need someone who can handle discretion, someone who can keep secrets. Olivia's pulse quickened. What kind of secrets? Adrian's lips curved slightly, but there was no humor in it. The kind that will change your life, he murmured. She stared at him, uncertainty warring with curiosity. Olivia hesitated for only a second before she reached forward and opened it. The words on the page made her breath hitch. Proposal for confidential employment agreement. Duration, 6 months. Compensation, $250,000. Her head snapped up. What exactly do you want me to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian Wolf's gaze didn't waver. You'll find out soon enough. Section 4. For the first few weeks, Olivia did her best to keep her head down and focus solely on her work. She scrubbed the floors, polished the marble counters, and arranged the extravagant floral displays that lined the hallways of the Wolf estate. The days were long, and the work was physically exhausting, but she had no complaints. Every dollar she earned brought her closer to saving Noah. That thought alone was enough to keep her moving. Despite her efforts to remain invisible, Olivia couldn't ignore the fact that Adrian Wolf was watching her. Not in an intrusive way, but in a manner that made her feel studied. At first, she assumed it was because he didn't trust her. Billionaires didn't hire maids off the street, and she wasn't exactly the type to blend into the usual household staff. Olivia wasn't like the others, who had worked for wealthy families for years. She had never been trained in etiquette or luxury housekeeping. Maybe Adrian was waiting for her to mess up, to prove she wasn't worth the effort. Adrian Wolf was an enigma. He barely spoke to anyone unless it was necessary, and he often disappeared for long business trips, leaving the mansion feeling like a hollow shell in his absence. But when he was home, his presence was undeniable. The air changed whenever he walked into a room, commanding attention even when he said nothing at all. He carried himself with the kind of effortless confidence that came with knowing he was one of the most powerful men in the world. And yet, despite all of his wealth and status, Olivia noticed something odd about him. He was lonely. It wasn't obvious at first, not when he was surrounded by assistants, lawyers, and business partners who clung to his every word. But beneath the surface, there was a quiet solitude that seemed to follow him like a shadow. The way he spent his evenings in his private study, drinking whiskey in silence, the way he avoided attending social events unless absolutely necessary, the way his eyes darkened whenever someone mentioned family. Olivia recognized that loneliness because she felt it too. It started with small things. Olivia frowned, stepping closer. It wasn't until she spotted the tiny note tucked into the stems that her heart clenched. For Noah. She blinked, staring at the words. No one in this house knew about her son, at least they weren't supposed to. Olivia had kept her personal life separate from her work, but someone had left this. Someone new. And when she looked up, she found Adrian Wolfe standing at the top of the staircase, watching her with an unreadable expression. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "Did you put these here?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Adrian didn't answer right away. He descended the stairs slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I overheard you speaking to Mrs. Brooks the other night," he said finally. "About your son." Olivia felt a chill creep down her spine. "You were listening?" "I wasn't eavesdropping," Adrian said smoothly. "I happened to be passing by." She didn't believe that for a second. "Why?" she asked, her voice tightening. "Why does it matter to you?" Adrian exhaled, rubbing his fingers along his jaw. "Because I know what it's like to want to protect someone and feel powerless to do so." Something flickered in his expression, an emotion Olivia couldn't quite decipher. Vulnerability? Regret? Whatever it was, it disappeared as quickly as it came, masked by his usual composure. "I don't need your pity," Olivia said, taking a step back. "I came here to work, not to be some charity case." Adrian's gaze hardened. "And I don't offer charity. If I wanted to help you, I would, but I respect that you're not asking for it." Olivia didn't know what to say to that. She had spent so long fighting to survive on her own that the idea of someone, especially someone like Adrian Wolfe, caring enough to pay attention to her struggles, felt foreign. "I should get back to work," she said, turning away. But as she moved past him, she heard his voice again. "Olivia," she stopped. "Let me know if you ever change your mind." Her fingers curled into fists. She wouldn't. She couldn't. Because the moment she let herself believe that someone like Adrian Wolfe could make a difference in her life was the moment she risked losing everything. And Olivia had already lost enough. Section 5. She stuck to her routine, avoiding any unnecessary interactions with Adrian and throwing herself into her work. The mansion was so large that it wasn't difficult to avoid him, especially since he spent most of his days in meetings or locked in his private office. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the strange tension in the air. And then something happened that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Olivia received a phone call from the hospital. She was in the middle of organizing the linen closet when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She hesitated before answering, knowing that personal calls weren't exactly encouraged during work hours. "Ms. Dawson?" came the voice on the other end. "Yes, this is Olivia. This is Dr. Patel from St. Mary's. I wanted to update you on Noah's condition." Her stomach twisted painfully. "Is something wrong?" Olivia's fingers clenched around the phone. "I understand," she whispered. "I know you've been working on securing the funds," Dr. Patel said gently. "But if we delay too much longer, his condition could deteriorate further. Have you explored any additional options?" Additional options. As if there was some magical solution she hadn't already considered. "I understand, Doctor," Patel said. "But I want you to prepare for the possibility that time isn't a luxury Noah has." The call ended, but Olivia stood frozen in the hallway, gripping the phone like a lifeline. She felt like she couldn't breathe, like the walls of the mansion were closing in on her. She needed money. She needed it now. Olivia had already exhausted every possible option. Loans had been denied, charity organizations had waiting lists, and government assistance wouldn't come through in time. The only thing she could do was keep working and pray that she could earn enough before it was too late. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't going to make it in time. "She's avoiding me," Adrian's voice said. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "She's proud," came another voice, one she recognized as Nolan Carter, Adrian's personal attorney and longtime friend. "It's what you admired about her from the start, isn't it?" Adrian let out a dry chuckle. "Admired? It's infuriating." Nolan laughed. "And yet here you are, trying to find ways to help her without making it obvious. You could just write a check, you know." "You think she'd take it?" Adrian scoffed. "She'd throw it back in my face." There was a pause. "Then give her something she can't refuse," Nolan suggested. "Something that feels like an opportunity rather than a handout." Olivia backed away from the door, her heart pounding. Was he talking about her? That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of her tiny employee quarters, Olivia's thoughts spiraled. She needed money, and Adrian Wolfe was offering something. Could she really afford to be so stubborn? The next morning, Olivia made a decision. She found Adrian in his study, seated behind his massive mahogany desk. flipping through a file. His crisp white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms, the image of effortless power. He looked up as soon as she entered. "Olivia," he said smoothly, setting the file down. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "You said something to me a few weeks ago, that if I ever changed my mind, I should let you know." Adrian's expression turned unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, watching her intently. "I remember." She took a deep breath. "I need help." Silence stretched between them. Adrian's lips curved slightly, not in triumph but in something softer, something that told her he had been waiting for this moment. "What do you need, Olivia?" She forced herself to stay steady. "I need enough to cover Noah's surgery." Adrian nodded slowly, and in exchange, her stomach twisted. "I don't want a handout, I want to work for it." His brows lifted slightly. "You're already working." "I mean something more," she said. "Something that pays enough to cover what I need. If you have a job for me, something real, I'll do it." Adrian studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, walking around the desk until he was standing just a few feet away from her. "I do have something," he said finally. Olivia swallowed. "What is it?" Adrian's eyes held hers. "A proposal." Her pulse skipped. "What kind of proposal?" He smirked. "The kind that could change your life." Section 6. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. A proposal? The way Adrian said it, with that slight smirk and the intensity in his gaze, made her chest tighten. She didn't know what to expect. Adrian Wolfe was a man who could buy anything, fix any problem with a single phone call. And yet, here he was, standing in front of her, acting as though she had some kind of choice in this. "What kind of proposal?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Adrian's smirk softened into something more serious. "I want you to be my fiancé." The word slammed into her like a freight train. Olivia blinked. What?" Adrian sighed, slipping his hands into his pockets. "It's complicated." "Then explain it to me." He gestured for her to sit, and despite the chaos in her mind, she lowered herself into the chair opposite his desk. Adrian remained standing, leaning against the edge of his desk, his gaze unreadable. "There's a situation I need to handle," he said. "A merger between Wolfe Enterprises and Kensington Holdings. It's been in the works for months, but the CEO of Kensington, Richard Kensington, is a traditionalist. He believes that stability at home reflects stability in business. And since I'm not exactly known for being in long-term relationships," Olivia finished for him, her lips pressing into a tight line. Adrian smirked. "Exactly." She let out a dry laugh. "So, what? You want me to pretend to be your devoted fiancé so this man will sign a business deal?" Adrian tilted his head. "Yes." "That's insane." He raised a brow. "Is it?" "Yes." She shot up from her chair. "You're asking me to lie to the world to pretend I'm engaged to a billionaire I barely know, just so you can close a business deal?" Adrian remained calm. "I'm offering you something that solves both our problems. You need money. I need credibility. It's a win-win." She stared at him, trying to process the sheer absurdity of what he was asking. "How long?" she asked, surprising herself. Adrian's expression didn't shift. 6 months. Olivia exhaled sharply. "And after 6 months? The engagement ends, we part ways, you keep the money." It sounded too simple, too clean. She narrowed her eyes. "And what exactly does this arrangement involve? Do I move in with you? Wear a ring? Give interviews about how deeply in love we are?" Adrian chuckled. "Some of that, yes. You'll live here at the mansion. There will be public appearances, yes, but nothing excessive. Kensington just needs to see that I'm not the reckless billionaire the media paints me to be." Olivia shook her head, her heart pounding. "And what happens when people find out it's fake?" "They won't." His voice was confident, assured. "As long as we both play our roles." Her mind reeled. This was madness, complete insanity. And yet, Noah. She thought of her son lying in a hospital bed, his body too small for all the wires and monitors attached to him. The way his little fingers clung to hers when he was scared. The way he tried so hard to be brave even when he was in pain. The cost of his surgery was a mountain she couldn't climb alone. But Adrian was handing her a ladder. 6 months, and that was all. She inhaled deeply. "How much?" Adrian didn't even hesitate. $2 million. $2 million. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of. More than enough for Noah's surgery, for his recovery, for a fresh start. She stared at Adrian, trying to gauge if he was serious. He was. His gaze was unwavering, his posture relaxed, as if offering a struggling maid $2 million to be his fake fiancée was an everyday occurrence. Her lips parted, but no words came out. He leaned in slightly. "Say yes, Olivia." She swallowed hard. "I need time to think." Adrian exhaled, nodding. "I understand, but don't take too long. Kensington arrives in 2 weeks. If you agree, we need to start preparing immediately." Olivia nodded numbly, then turned and left his office, her mind spinning. She didn't sleep that night. She tossed and turned in her tiny bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over again. This wasn't what she wanted. She had taken this job to earn an honest living, to take care of her son with dignity, not to sell herself to a billionaire in exchange for security. But was it selling herself? 6 months of pretending, no real relationship, no real expectations, just playing a role, and in return, her son would live. By the time the sun rose, Olivia knew her answer. She found Adrian in the dining room, sipping coffee, dressed in an immaculately tailored suit. She stood across from him, her hands clenched into fists. "Okay," she said, "I'll do it." Adrian looked up, his gaze sharp. She swallowed. "I'll be your fiancé." A slow, knowing smile spread across his lips. "Good choice, Olivia." Section 7. Olivia sat across from Adrian in the grand dining room, her heart pounding in her chest. The words had barely left her lips, but there was no taking them back. She had agreed. She was going to be Adrian Wolf's fake fiancé. Adrian's smirk widened as if he'd been expecting her answer all along. "Good," he said, setting his coffee cup down. "We have a lot to do." Her throat felt dry. "What now?" "We start preparing. You'll need a new wardrobe, a crash course on high society etiquette, and of course a proper engagement ring." Her stomach flipped. An engagement ring. Even if this was all pretend, the thought of wearing another man's ring after everything she'd been through sent an uncomfortable shiver down her spine. She lifted her chin. "I don't want anything flashy," she sighed. "Just nothing ridiculous." Adrian chuckled. "We'll see." The next few days were a whirlwind. First came the shopping. Adrian took her to an exclusive boutique on 5th Avenue, the kind of place where the cheapest dress cost more than her rent for an entire year. Olivia had never stepped foot in such a luxurious place before. She felt like an outsider among the elegant displays of designer gowns and shimmering jewelry. Adrian, on the other hand, moved through the store with effortless ease, selecting dresses with sharp precision, his eyes assessing what would suit her best. The phrase sent an odd sensation through her. His fiancée. It was a role, just an act. But the way he said it so naturally, as if it was real, made her chest tighten. After hours of trying on gowns and heels, Olivia found herself seated in a private jewelry showroom, staring at rows of engagement rings that sparkled under the soft lighting. Adrian sat beside her, leaning back in his chair, watching her with quiet amusement. "Pick one," he said. She swallowed, staring at the enormous diamonds in front of her. "They're all too much," he smirked. "That's the point." She hesitated, then pointed to a ring that wasn't the biggest in the collection but was still larger than anything she'd ever imagined wearing. A delicate, oval-cut diamond set in platinum. Elegant, understated, but undeniably breathtaking. Adrian reached forward, plucking the ring from its case. Without warning, he took her hand, his fingers cool against her skin, and slid the ring onto her finger. Olivia's breath hitched. It fit perfectly. Adrian's voice was softer when he spoke. "Looks good on you." Olivia's heart pounded. She pulled her hand back quickly, breaking the moment. "So what's next? More shopping? A crash course in billionaire socializing?" Adrian leaned back, his smirk returning. "Something like that." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Adrian had arranged for a private etiquette coach, an older woman named Margaret, who drilled Olivia on everything from posture to dining manners to how to gracefully deflect intrusive questions at society events. She learned how to walk in towering heels, how to hold a champagne flute just right, how to smile and nod at the right moments. It was exhausting, but Olivia threw herself into it because the stakes were too high to fail. Every night she collapsed into bed, sore and drained, only to wake up and do it all over again. Adrian, to his credit, was patient. He never snapped at her when she got things wrong. never lost his temper when she tripped in her designer heels or fumbled through the endless etiquette rules. Instead, he corrected her with a calm, unwavering presence. And that, more than anything, was what made Olivia uneasy. Because she had expected Adrian to be cold, distant, arrogant. Instead, he was attentive. Not just in an employer-employee way, but in a way that made her feel like he actually cared about how she was handling all of this. Which was dangerous because this wasn't real. And the last thing Olivia could afford was forgetting that. But then, one evening, everything changed. She had just finished another exhausting round of etiquette lessons when she found Adrian in the mansion's study, reviewing paperwork. He looked up as she entered. "You're improving," he noted. "Margaret says you only tripped once today." Olivia rolled her eyes, sinking into a chair. "Progress." Adrian smirked, but then his expression grew more serious. "Kensington's gala is in 3 days," he said. "That will be our first public appearance as a couple." Olivia's stomach clenched. 3 days. That was all the time she had left before the world would see her standing beside Adrian Wolfe, wearing his ring, pretending to be in love. She took a deep breath. "I'll be ready." Adrian studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good." Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk toward her. "What's this?" she asked, frowning. "Your contract," he said simply. Olivia's breath hitched. She hesitated before opening it, scanning the crisp pages. It was all laid out in clear legal terms. The duration of the agreement, the expectations, the financial terms. 6 months of pretending. 6 months of playing the role of his devoted fiancée. Her fingers tightened around the paper. So why did it feel so final? Adrian watched her, his gaze unreadable. "If there's anything you want to add or change, now's the time." Olivia exhaled slowly. There was nothing to change. This was what she had agreed to. This was what she had to do. She picked up the pen and, with a steady hand, signed her name at the bottom of the contract. Adrian's lips curved slightly. "Welcome to the engagement, Olivia." Section 8. The days leading up to the Kensington gala passed in a blur, each moment filled with final preparations and an underlying tension Olivia couldn't quite shake. No matter how much she told herself that this was just an arrangement, a transaction, something about it felt different. She wasn't just walking into a role, she was stepping into Adrian Wolfe's world, and it terrified her. The night of the gala arrived faster than she was prepared for. Olivia stood in front of the full-length mirror in the penthouse suite Adrian had arranged for her to get ready in. The dress, a deep emerald gown with a fitted bodice and a flowing silk skirt, clung to her frame perfectly, its neckline just daring enough to make a statement without crossing into scandalous territory. Her hair was styled in soft waves cascading down one shoulder. The makeup artist Adrian had hired had worked magic, sculpting her features with precision, making her look like someone she barely recognized, like someone who belonged in a billionaire's world. And then there was the ring, the engagement ring. It sat heavy on her finger, a constant reminder of what she had agreed to. A knock at the door made her stomach flip. She took a breath, then opened it to find Adrian standing there, dressed in a classic black tuxedo that made him look impossibly polished, dangerously powerful. For a moment he just looked at her. His gaze traveled from her face down to the gown, his expression unreadable. Then, something flickered in his eyes, something almost appreciative, before he smirked. "You clean up well, Olivia." His smirk widened. "Come on, time to introduce the world to my fiancé." Her heart pounded. She wasn't ready for this, but it didn't matter. She had signed the contract. She had made the choice. Now there was no going back. The car ride to the gala was quiet, filled with the soft hum of classical music playing from the speakers. Adrian sat beside her, perfectly composed, his gaze fixed on the city lights flashing past the window. As they neared the venue, he finally spoke. "Remember, Olivia, tonight is about appearances. We need to sell this engagement. There will be questions, cameras, people watching our every move." She nodded, fingers tightening around the small clutch in her lap. Adrian's voice softened slightly. "Just stay close to me, and you'll be fine." Somehow that did little to calm her nerves. The moment they stepped onto the red carpet, Olivia was hit with an onslaught of camera flashes and voices calling out their names. It was overwhelming. Adrian, however, remained unfazed. His hand found the small of her back, guiding her forward with ease, his expression smooth and confident. The cameras adored him. And just like that, Olivia realized, So did the people. They whispered as they passed, their eyes flickering between Adrian and her, measuring, analyzing, judging. She felt it, the weight of expectation, the curiosity, the doubt. Smile. Adrian murmured against her ear, his breath warm against her skin. She forced herself to. The questions started almost immediately. Adrian, how long have you two been engaged? Olivia, what's it like being engaged to one of the most eligible billionaires in New York? When's the wedding? Adrian fielded the questions effortlessly, his arm tightening around her waist in a possessive display that left no room for doubt. They moved through the crowd, greeting important guests, shaking hands with investors, engaging in the small talk that Olivia had been coached on. It was exhausting, but she played the part. She laughed at the right moments, nodded when she was supposed to, pretended like she belonged in this world of money and power. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, not by the press, but by someone else. The sensation prickled at the back of her neck, making her uneasy. Then she saw her, a woman, tall, striking, with platinum blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, watching them from across the room. Her gaze was locked onto Adrian, but the moment she noticed Olivia staring, her lips curled into something almost amused. Adrian stiffened beside her. Olivia glanced up at him. Who is that? His jaw tightened. No one important. But the way his posture changed, the way his fingers flexed against the glass of whiskey in his hand, told her otherwise. And then the woman started toward them. Olivia felt the shift before she even spoke. Adrian, the woman purred, her voice smooth, practiced. I was hoping I'd see you tonight. Adrian's expression remained blank. Lena. Lena. There was history there. Olivia could feel it. Lena's gaze flickered to her. And this must be the fiancé I've been hearing so much about. Lena took it, her grip cool, assessing. A pleasure. There was nothing genuine about it. Olivia could tell. The way Lena's eyes lingered on her ring, the way she barely concealed her amusement. This woman didn't believe the engagement for a second. Adrian's voice was calm, but there was an underlying edge to it. I wasn't expecting you here. Lena shrugged, sipping her champagne. I couldn't resist. These events are always so entertaining. You never know what surprises might happen. Her eyes flickered to Olivia again. A chill crawled up Olivia's spine. There was something unsettling about Lena, something dangerous, but before she could analyze it further, another guest approached, drawing Lena's attention away. Adrian wasted no time in steering Olivia away from her. What was that? Olivia asked once they were alone in a quieter part of the ballroom. Adrian exhaled sharply. Lena Hayes, my ex-dot. Of course, Olivia should have known. She doesn't believe the engagement, Olivia said. Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line. She won't be the only one. Olivia swallowed hard. And if she tries to expose us? Adrian's gaze met hers, steady, unshaken. Then we make sure she doesn't. His confidence was unwavering. But Olivia wasn't so sure, because for the first time since this arrangement began, she realized something terrifying. It wasn't just the press watching them, it wasn't just investors and society elites. It was the people from Adrian's past, people who knew him, people who might see through the lies. And if one of them decided to expose the truth, this entire arrangement could come crashing down. Section 9. Who was she to Adrian? His ex. That much was clear. But there was something more. A weight in the way he spoke her name. An unspoken history neither of them had elaborated on. Olivia didn't have time to press the issue, though. Not in a room full of people eager to tear apart any cracks in their perfect engagement story. It wasn't until hours later, when they were finally leaving the gala, that she had a moment to breathe. The car ride back to the penthouse was thick with silence. Adrian sat beside her, fingers steepled against his lips, his gaze focused on the city lights streaking past. Olivia hesitated before speaking. She doesn't believe us. Adrian didn't move. She doesn't have to. But she could ruin this, Olivia pressed. If she goes to the press, she narrowed her eyes. How can you be so sure? For a long moment he didn't answer. Then finally he exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Because Lena isn't just an ex. She's a problem I dealt with a long time ago. And she knows what happens when she crosses me. There was a finality in his words that sent a chill up Olivia's spine. She swallowed, shifting in her seat. That sounds ominous. Adrian turned to look at her then, his gaze unreadable. It's not something you need to worry about. But she was worried. Olivia knew better. Something was coming, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. By the time they arrived at the penthouse, exhaustion was beginning to settle into her bones. But just as she stepped out of the car, a sharp voice called out to her, "Miss Olivia!" She turned just in time to see a familiar figure hurrying toward her. Amanda. Her heart stopped. "What is it? What's wrong?" Amanda stopped in front of her, breathless. "It's Noah. He started having trouble breathing an hour ago. I called an ambulance. He's at St. James Hospital. Olivia felt the world tilt beneath her. Not now. She barely registered Adrian's voice beside her. "I'll get the car. Let's go." Everything else blurred. The only thing she could focus on was the crushing fear in her chest, the sheer terror of what she might find when she reached the hospital. By the time they arrived, Olivia was barely holding herself together. She ran through the emergency room doors, scanning the chaos for any sign of Noah. A nurse spotted her immediately. "You're Noah's mother?" "Yes," she gasped. "Where is he? What happened?" The nurse guided her down the hallway. "He had a respiratory episode. His oxygen levels dropped and he was struggling to breathe. The doctor stabilized him, but what?" Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. The nurse hesitated, then sighed. "His condition is worsening. He needs the surgery sooner rather than later. I know you were hoping to wait, but we don't have that kind of time anymore." Olivia felt something inside her crack. She had fought so hard, saved every penny, tried to be strong for Noah, and yet time had betrayed her. She sank down into the nearest chair, her head in her hands. Adrian stood beside her, silent for a long moment. Then his voice cut through the heavy air. "How much?" Olivia looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "What?" He didn't look at her. His gaze was locked onto the nurse. "How much will the surgery cost?" The nurse blinked in surprise. "The full procedure? With post-op care and recovery?" Adrian nodded. She hesitated before answering. "Nearly $200,000. Silence. Then Adrian exhaled. "It's done. Schedule it." Olivia's breath caught. Adrian, you can't just..." He finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I can. And I will." She shook her head. "I told you before. I won't take charity." "This isn't charity," Adrian said, his voice quieter now. "It's a choice. A choice I'm making because I can. Because your son doesn't have time to wait for you to scrape together the money. Because you're too damn stubborn to accept help even when you need it." She bit her lip, her chest tightening. "I don't want to owe you." His gaze softened just slightly. "You don't." But that was the problem. She already did. And the deeper she fell into Adrian Wolf's world, the more impossible it became to escape. Section 10. Noah needed this surgery, and Adrian had made it happen with a single phone call. Yet he kept fighting, just like she had. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned just as Adrian stepped inside, his suit jacket slung over his arm, his tie loosened. He looked exhausted, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, were focused solely on her. "How is he?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. Olivia swallowed. "Stable. The doctors say he's strong enough for the procedure." Adrian nodded, stepping closer. For a moment he just stood there, studying Noah's sleeping form. Then he exhaled. "You should get some rest." She shook her head. "I can't. Not until it's over." He hesitated before pulling up a chair beside her. "Then I'll stay." A lump formed in her throat. "You don't have to." "I know." But he did anyway. The room lapsed into silence. For the first time in what felt like forever, Olivia allowed herself to relax, just slightly. She didn't have the energy to fight anymore, not when the weight of everything pressed so heavily on her shoulders. Minutes passed. Then softly, Adrian spoke. She tensed but didn't deny it. He let out a low chuckle. "You remind me of myself, you know." She frowned. "I seriously doubt that." She looked away. "It's different." "Why?" "Because..." She trailed off, struggling to put it into words. "Because taking help feels like losing control, like admitting defeat." Adrian was silent for a moment, then he leaned forward, his voice low. "There's nothing weak about choosing to survive." The words hit her harder than she expected. She didn't respond. Couldn't respond, because deep down she knew he was right. The next morning arrived too quickly. The moment they wheeled Noah into surgery, Olivia felt like she couldn't breathe. She stood frozen in the hospital hallway, her nails digging into her palms, her heart hammering against her ribs. Adrian was beside her in an instant. Come on. You're not going to do any good standing here. Let's go. Before she could protest, he gently guided her toward the elevators. 30 minutes later, they were sitting in a quiet corner of a cafe near the hospital. Olivia barely touched the coffee in front of her, her hands wrapped tightly around the warm ceramic. Adrian, on the other hand, was calm, controlled. "How are you so steady?" she asked, watching him. He shrugged. "Years of practice," she scoffed. "Doing what? Ruining people's lives?" His lips twitched, but there was something unreadable in his gaze. "You think that's all I do? That's what people say." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "And what do you think?" She swallowed. "I don't know." Silence stretched between them. Then softly, Adrian said, "I wasn't always like this. The man you see now, the billionaire, the businessman, the one people whisper about, I created him." Olivia frowned. "Why?" "Because when you grow up with nothing, you learn quickly that the world doesn't give second chances." His gaze darkened. "I built my empire because I refused to be powerless again." Her stomach twisted. She knew that feeling all too well. "Then why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "Because I can." The honesty in his voice left her breathless. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. She grabbed it instantly, her fingers shaking as she answered. "Ms. Carter?" It was the doctor. "The surgery is over. Noah's stable." A choked sob escaped her lips. She barely registered Adrian reaching over, gently squeezing her hand. "Can I see him?" she whispered. "Of course, he's in recovery now." She was already on her feet before the doctor could finish speaking. Adrian followed without hesitation. The next few hours passed in a blur. Noah was weak but awake when they arrived, his small fingers curling around Olivia's as she pressed a trembling kiss to his forehead. Relief crashed over her in waves, leaving her breathless. Adrian stayed back, giving them space. But when Olivia finally turned to look at him, something shifted. For the first time since she had met him, she saw past the power, the arrogance. She saw the man underneath. Then that terrified her more than anything else. Days passed, Noah grew stronger, and Olivia was forced to face the truth. She owed Adrian Wolfe more than she could ever repay. But it wasn't the debt that scared her. It was the way he made her feel, because if she wasn't careful, she might just lose her heart to him too. The end. If you love this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-wrenching emotional tales. Your support helps bring more stories to life. Stay tuned for the next gripping journey. Next gripping journey. Next gripping journey.